Hey, how's it going? So we just talked about Edward Taylor. He was one of the preachers, but I wanted to kind of categorically put him in the other one just to show you that of the development of the genres. But here we've got a couple more, and I'm putting these in their own category because it's important to connect some of the preachers with some of the the ideology and the importance of God and these types of writings in the Puritan beliefs. So let's take a look here at Cotton Mather. So he wrote some 400 works, but his most famous is the Magnalia Christi Americana. It's a super long, 7-volume nostalgic work about the history of New England in a Christian context and how God helped people become civilized in the New World. So yeah, people were already feeling nostalgic about 1620. I believe this was written about 1702, so he's writing, they're already looking back and looking at, feeling nostalgic about the beginning. It's interesting because, when we think about nostalgia, we usually reflect on an age way back, or when I was younger. But yeah, it's only 80 years more or less, 70 years. And it's very interesting how so much could be written. But like I said before, he took off a lot of the ideas of the Plymouth Plantation work that was published in the 19th century, and his was published before that was published. And like I said before, also people are taking ideas from previous texts and expounding upon them. So in this, he speaks of Bradford and Winthrop. Remember the founders? He represents the old order of the Puritan preachers like his father. His father was also famous, and he carried on this tradition of the old order of the Puritans. So this is stretching into now the 18th century. Here we've got a picture of him. All these pictures we're seeing are very aristocratic individuals. They're dressed up. Some of these, this is an etching here, I believe. We've seen a couple of, I think we saw a sculpture, we've seen a painting. And they're all portraits of some of these original people. And it's very important to kind of get an idea of what they look like and how they dressed. So this guy, very interesting, is very, very interesting fellow. Because he promoted some very progressive ideas, but at the same time, he had some very older ideas that represented some of the older ideas that he inherited from his father. So as you can see here, I wrote up here, he promoted inoculation against smallpox because he entertained the idea of becoming a doctor beforehand. But this was also in stark contrast with his spiritual ideas, because he did believe in witchcraft and was indirectly involved in the Salem witch trials. So the Salem witch trials, very interesting part of American history. I used to live in Salem, so I used to live right next to the House of Seven Gables, actually, and the house I lived in was some 300 years old, I think. Anyway, it's 250 years old. But it just, to live in the town and go to the museum and see some of these wood houses that were built in the 1600s that are still standing. You can walk around and you can see a lot of the maritime culture, the old Salem culture, but in the tourist industry, this is one of the major things that draws people in the Salem Witch Trial Museum, right off the square there, off Salem Square. It has this kind of really dramatic reenactment of what it was like. But just to how the women were, the people were condemned here for being witches, and the belief in witchcraft, and the connection that Cotton Mather has with that is very important, because it's not just part of the pop culture here, the part of the culture. Oh, the witch trials. He's very involved in the literature also of the colonial era. So some more stuff about him. He promoted the carrot over the stick idea in school discipline. What is that? Well, obviously the stick is when you punish people, and don't do that again. You make people improve by punishing them. That was a lot of the old way of doing things. But he promoted the carrot idea of enticing people with rewards, because that's what's better, the carrot or the stick method in school discipline. Obviously today, you can't do the stick method. All of the old methods are now illegal. So, enticing people to do things by merit by rewards is, some of his ideas way back then were developed, and today, look where we are. So he promoted also the mental as well as the physical state of health. So when someone went to a doctor, it was not just about looking at the physical state of the person, it was looking about their mental health also. So this was very interesting. Obviously, maybe it was connected with his ideas on, the mental state of the women, the people during the Salem witch trials. But it's also connected to the idea of mental health, which is something today which is very, been very developed since the past 150 years or so. Let's take a look here at Jonathan Edwards. So Jonathan Edwards was another preacher, Puritan preacher of great repute and fire. He was influenced by the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment, if you step back, and we'll take a look at this a little bit later on, but the Enlightenment it's a very, objective era, collective era, where people wrote a lot about, didactic purpose. It had a collective purpose. It talked a lot about society. We'll talk more about the Enlightenment later. But this, he had an influence on this because the Enlightenment did run through the 18th century here. So anyway, Jonathan Edwards worked in Northampton, Massachusetts as a preacher, replacing his grandfather. So you can see, once again, we've got the idea of heritage here. Once again, Puritan, so we could see the Puritan ideas developing from the beginning, all 150 years so far, developing through here. Northampton, Massachusetts, western part of the state, north of Westfield, where I mentioned before. And it's a town today where there's a lot of many colleges, great college town. So he was part of the Great Awakening of the 1730s and 1740s. So important to remember the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening strived to resuscitate American spiritual values, to remind people of the importance of God, the importance of the church, the importance of spirituality, the importance of moral obligation, the importance of being a good Christian, the importance of their duty to God and duty to society. He published many sermons. His most famous is Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God in 1741. So this has a very poetic language and imagery. You could see a lot of we've seen some poetry already, and the use of, when people write poetry, the use of how they're writing with the use of the words, the exclamations, the imagery, the different rhetorical techniques that are used when people write poetry. Very important things to look at. Now, in this particular one here, there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of urgency about, something's got to be done. Because when we think about that, the Great Awakening, we've been sleeping. We need to wake up. The urgent sense of coming back to our state. Here's a picture of him. Once again, notice the neck's covered up, the black background, face stands out, very stern fellow. So the tone of the sermon and the message it entails is that God has a negative view on mankind. And I'll show you an excerpt of this in a couple of minutes, but it's important to note that this is not the only thing that he wrote and not the only style of writing that he had. This is in contrast to some of his other optimistic sermons about salvation. So let's take a look at this. This is a long text, but I just wanted to lay this out. Look at some of the imagery in here. If you cry to God to pity you, he will be so far from pitying you in your doleful case or shewing you the least regard or favor, that instead of that, he'll only tread you underfoot. And though he will know that you can't bear the weight of omnipotence treading upon you, yet he won't regard that, but he will crush you under his feet without mercy. He'll crush out your blood and make it fly, and it shall be sprinkled on his garments, so as to stain all his remnant. He will not only hate you, but he will have you in the utmost contempt. No place shall be thought fit for you, but under his feet, to be trodden down as the mire of the streets. Wow. Look at that text. I mean, it's just, step on you and your blood will fly out and stain his garments. The imagery here is incredible. The words here, hate, he will despise, he will not only hate you, but he will have you in the utmost contempt, capital C, under his feet to be trodden down. So, the imagery is very clear. Trampled underfoot, under the foot of God. God is angry. This is the way God feels. Part of the Great Awakening. Does this seem to you like the stick or the carrot? Obviously the stick here, right? But once again, it's part of a vast array of approaches to looking at the different types of spiritual writing. So on genres, we've seen various genres in the New World, and once again I'm saying New World here. We've seen the Explorers Chronicles, we've seen the ones, Champlain, Cabeza de Vaca, Colón, Christopher Columbus. We've seen poetry, we've seen the captivity novel, and we've seen a bunch of different styles of sermons. But another genre that's closely related to religion is the spiritual autobiography. I mentioned this before, but this is how individuals show that they have attained grace through God and worked their way up the spiritual ladder from a state of sin. So the idea here is to, show how you were down before, how you sinned, and show how you discovered God, and show how you were brought to grace. And this autobiography is written to show that you are an example for other people to be pulled out of the clutches of sin. And this is an example. An example of this is, once again, Jonathan Edward here, when he wrote a personal narrative. So that's his input on not just what we just saw, but also on the personal narrative here, which is this different genre of the spiritual autobiography.